Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 73 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks. They took on the Los Angeles Kings and lost by a score of 8-1. And this is going to end up being a shorter review than usual because I am not going to discuss every single player's performance here tonight. At best, a couple of these players were average, and more often than not, many of them were just kind of bad. And so it just doesn't make for a very interesting or exciting discussion. So instead, I will highlight a few key areas that I want to talk about in terms of these players, as well as discuss what truly ended up going wrong here tonight, why this game ended up feeling as frustrating as it did. Because on the surface, obviously, very real reason is that they lose this 8-1. It's not entertaining to see. The Sharks just get beat up and blown out on the scoreboard. But what to me ends up putting this over the top and really ends up making disappointing is the fact that this was a tale of two games here tonight. The first half, the Sharks actually don't look half bad, and I mark this at the goal that Warren Foegele scores that makes it 4-1 Los Angeles, because prior to that, the Sharks, they're playing decently well, with the major difference maker being the loss in the special teams battle. The Kings get the power play goal from Foegele, the power play goal from Kempe, and even their first goal from Danault came just a couple of seconds after a Sharks penalty had expired. Meanwhile, on the San Jose side, they had almost a full 2 minutes of 5-on-3 power play time that they failed to convert on. That was the true difference maker in this first half. When it actually came to the 5-on-5 play, not only was it relatively even in terms of chances for and against, they are also rather even in terms of actual goals, with Trevor Moore scoring for the Kings, and then it is Cam Lund for a second straight game getting the only goal for the Sharks. Strange coincidence for sure, but at that point, you can't actually be that upset. Warsofsky himself even mentioned in an interview in the first period when the Sharks were down 2-0 that he wasn't all that disappointed with how the Sharks had played up to that point, but instead that they were going to the box so often and getting beat up by a relatively weak Los Angeles Kings power play. But it was after this Warren Foegele goal which seemed to really flip a switch for the Sharks, and they seemed to revert back to a San Jose team that we had become accustomed to during the large parts of last season, where in the previous year, they would have games where they would fall behind 1-0 or 2-0 in the first period, and then they just completely give up and sleepwalk through until the end of the game because they would lose faith in their ability to actually win on any particular night. The biggest progression that the Sharks had made from last season to this one is those good vibes that have allowed them to, even in the games in which they're not playing particularly well and they are getting blown out, to still manage to keep up a certain level of morale that can make it seem as though they're sticking to their identity, so to speak. But they really got away from that in this second half of this game against Los Angeles. And I think the major reason for that is that the Kings are just a very frustrating team to play against. When they are online, when they are fully locked in here, the Kings really don't give you much to actually work with. They are very willing to completely sacrifice a lot of their offensive capability to make sure that you don't actually get anything doing on your offensive side of things. This is why they are the second lowest scoring team currently in a playoff spot, only ahead of the Minnesota Wild, at least coming into tonight. They managed 8 goals in this game, but also the reason for why they are the second least scored against team in the entire NHL, only below the Winnipeg Jets. They have their forwards high up in the offensive zone, so if this puck ever ends up going the other way, they can have at least one forward tracking back on the back check, if not 2 of them, and this allows for their defense to really step up aggressively at the blue line, which puts your forwards in a really tough spot where you have just 2 pretty simple options here. Either you try to execute a really pretty passing play, which the Sharks were only able to accomplish a couple of times here tonight, or you simply have to dump the puck in and go and chase after it, which is just simply not the Sharks' style. Their top 6 is not built to do this. Players like Celebrini, Smith, and Eklund, they will eventually, hopefully, get to a point where they could end up having success in this area, but right now they'd rather play more of that run and gun style that just doesn't really work when the Kings are playing as well as they have been over these last couple of months and as well as they did here in this game. And then their bottom six, which would mostly feature players who can have success in this type of area, because it is instead filled with these replacement level fourth liners, even if they would normally be good at the jump, dump, and chase, are you really expecting Ty Dellandrea and Noah Gregor to win that many of these types of battles? Not exactly. And so instead, the Sharks just couldn't seem to get much generated in the latter half, and it led to this frustration that caused them to make mistake after mistake and really piled on these goals against in the latter part of the second period, as well as the entirety of the third period as well. And so this game really ends up getting out of hand and causing this 8-1 loss, and is the reason for why I thought this was rather frustrating and rather disappointing, because it did feel as though we had a brief glimpse at what we thought we left in the rearview mirror last season with that 23-24 Sharks team. Before we get into the players to talk about, I guess I should briefly mention once again a standings update here. Not the most exciting one, as the Sharks remain last place because of this loss, 49 points now with 9 games remaining on the schedule. Chicago was in action earlier today. They played against the Utah Hockey Club. They also lost in regulation, so they stand pat at 51 points. No changes in this area besides one more game played from both teams. Now moving on to these players, we'll start off at the top with Macklin Celebrini. You know, for anyone who has watched my reviews throughout this season, you will know that I am a huge fan of Celebrini. This is a player who I think has had an incredible rookie season. This is the player who I think will be able to lead the San Jose Sharks back to a playoff spot within the next couple of years, potentially to a Stanley Cup, fingers crossed, within the next few years. He is truly the future of this franchise. But at the same time, it hasn't always been sunshines and rainbows for him this season. It hasn't always been a perfect game over and over again. And there have been games in which he has gone up against these more well-structured opponents like Los Angeles tonight, like Carolina, like Dallas, where he has had those issues of being able to find those same openings. Because as I mentioned earlier on, Celebrini is the type of player who wants to be able to carry this puck into the zone with possession. But when you're surrounded by 3 or 4 black jerseys, as was the case very often here tonight, it is exceptionally difficult to actually pull this off. And you could see the frustration very obviously through Celebrini's body language. Now, it's a good thing that he doesn't necessarily channel this frustration out and take it out onto his opponents by slashing players or elbowing them in the face, but you can tell he kind of internalizes that, and it does seem to affect his game slightly. It is, of course, the first time in his career in which he is not kind of the guy necessarily, where he is the best player on the ice every single night and is able to truly have a massive impact on these games. At the NHL level, despite how impressive he has looked in this rookie season, he doesn't have the ability to carry the San Jose Sharks team to a win on a consistent basis. It is the reason for why they are still last place in the NHL. Just with even how good Celebrini has been, the rest of the team is just simply not there. And this isn't a surprise for a first overall pick. A team that gets a first overall pick, you expect them to be bad, but it is still a sort of learning experience, a chance to mature, I would say, for Celebrini. These frustrating moments will hopefully only last until the end of this year. I'm hopeful that the Sharks will be better next season, and this is a primary reason for why I don't think that the Sharks should just tank again for Gavin McKenna in the next year, because allowing Celebrini to have to go through these types of experience over and over again once more in another full season just doesn't really seem as though it is the correct approach. Next, I'll discuss Cam Lund. As I mentioned, Lund, for a second straight game here, scores the only goal for the San Jose Sharks. And it was quite interesting because yesterday against the Rangers, he scores a goal that makes a 6-0 game go to 6-1. So it was not that much of a surprise that even though that was his first career goal, there really wasn't much of a celebration. Kind of kept it very even keel. But here tonight, Cam Lund scores. This cuts the lead in half. This makes it 2-1. You're thinking there would be more elation on his face, now second straight game with a goal, and yet he still keeps it very stone-faced. Somewhat of a surprise. Maybe he had a glimpse into the future. Maybe he's like a savant and he was able to see that the Sharks would end up losing this game 8-1, and so there wasn't much to get excited by for him. But you usually kind of see these rookies really revel in these goals being scored. Cam Lund, though, seems to be all business. It's not necessarily a negative or a positive thing, it's just interesting to see. What was perhaps more interesting, though, was the fact that Cam Lund actually started this game and finished this game on the Sharks' first line. I guess Warsofsky was liking what he had seen in the previous game, considering he was the only Sharks goal scorer against the Rangers, that he decides to put him in this position. But what this means is that if someone comes into the top six, someone does have to leave. And as I mentioned earlier on in a previous video, the Sharks' top six is mostly set. Guys like Celebrini, Toffoli, Wenberg, Eklund, and Smith, it is unlikely that they will ever be leaving the top six for the rest of the season. Perhaps after these two really, really rough games, Warsofsky might try and throw something at the wall and sees what sticks, and someone finds himself in like a bottom six. I don't think it will happen, but it is certainly possible. But those five players were most likely to remain in this situation, meaning the only real flexibility that they had was with Colin Graf, and that is indeed who ends up getting dropped to this third line, which brings me to Graf, because this is the true reason for why, in my video a couple of days ago when I discussed Bordelot and Gushin, why I wanted to call those couple of players up. Because when you decide to end up making a swap like this and you put Colin Graf into your bottom six, a player who has actually been playing rather well for you, you are putting him into a position where I won't say he's like set up to fail, but he doesn't really get to shine all that brightly. Dellandrea and Noah Gregor are two replacement level fourth liners, while Colin Graf, someone who has been finding more of an offensive flair to his game as of late. This is not a combination that is actually going to find any sort of success. And so you taking Colin Graf and essentially throwing him to the wolves here with this decision, and it is why I had said that the Sharks should be trying to have more offensive jump in their bottom six, because having multiple of these very, very similar style of players means that in a game in which maybe a line or two isn't rolling for you, you're going to have results that end up looking like this one, where you're only managing to score one goal in a couple of straight games. And so Graf, again, it was kind of his performance was sacrificed here tonight. When it comes to his two line mates, Dellandrea and Gregor, they did not have good games. I was already surprised to see Gregor. I wasn't that surprised to see Gregor come back into the lineup, but I was surprised to see who he replaced, which was Patrick Giles. Giles, to me, had been probably one of the more consistent and impressive bottom six players. You know, I didn't think I would ever say that, but it is the case. Giles had looked all right. And the fact that he steps out, but Ty Dellandrea, who had gone 3 straight games taking really bad penalties, a couple of offensive zone ones, the one in that last game against the Rangers was egregiously bad. He seemed to be destined to be benched for this one, and yet somehow manages to maintain a spot in the lineup. I don't see why that is, and both Gregor and Dellandrea didn't really do much. While Dellandrea does not end up taking another penalty, Gregor fills in for him and takes 2 of them in the first period, which lead to both of these Kings goals, which truly changes the pace of this game. So just really awful for both of these players, and again, it sets Graf up to not really have a very fun experience here tonight. And when it comes to the Sharks' fourth line, the player who I do want to talk about here is Barclay Goodrow, because he did have a really good performance against the New York Rangers, and I will say he also actually carried that through here tonight and was one of the Sharks' better players, which is to say that he wasn't as bad as some of the other guys that they had. But what I do want to mention as well is his mistake on this first Kings goal, that one coming from Phillip Danault. After the Sharks' penalty had expired, they returned to 5-on-5 very, very briefly. Barclay Goodrow completely loses his positioning on the ice, does not cover his man. He gets caught puck watching, and that allows Danault to score this goal. And yesterday, in the post-game press conference, Ryan Warsofsky made sure to mention that the major problems with the Sharks yesterday was that they made a lot of young mistakes. And it was true. Guys like Cagnoni, Celebrini made errors that caused the Rangers to be able to score a couple of goals. I'll be very interested to see if Ryan Warsofsky in his post-game interview actually calls out this mistake from Barclay Goodrow, a young mistake from one of the most veteran players on the team. My odds, my bets here are that he will not say anything about that. Then when it comes to the Sharks defensively, the big thing that I want to mention here as the kind of overarching topic is the fact that the Sharks, their defense is obviously very, very inexperienced. And that is not just to say that, oh yeah, a lot of these guys are young and don't have many games in the NHL, and as is the case with Mukhamadullin, Lucas Carlsson, and Luca Cagnoni, but it is also to say that these pairings in general are just not very familiar with each other. Ferraro and Mukhamadullin are the longest lasting pairing on this team. They've only been together for like a month, maybe a month and a half. I'm not exactly sure how long, but Lucas Carlsson and Liljegren, this is what, their 3rd or 4th game together. Vlasic and Cagnoni have never played together. Last game it was Cagnoni and Schultz who had not really played together besides in the Barracuda, but not in the NHL, which is an entirely different story. And then it was Cagnoni and Desharnais who hadn't really played much together either. So you're getting a lot of this inexperience and this lack of chemistry together, which has led to these types of goals that have started to kind of come back up. I mentioned yesterday in my Rangers review on that goal that they gave up to Artemi Panarin that it was something that we had been seeing from the Sharks earlier this season, but that we weren't seeing as much of them as of late because of the fact that it seemed as though they had gotten more in tune with each other, and so they could actually keep up decent enough defensive zone coverage. But now, with these defensemen who are not really knowing exactly what their defensive partners are going to be doing on the ice, they suddenly end up leaving guys wide open. And on this Trevor Moore goal, the only one 5-on-5, besides I guess the Deneau goal, if you want to say technically it is, in the first half of this game, that Trevor Moore goal is a big difference maker that ruined the potential comeback after the Cam Lund goal. This is because Lucas Carlsson and Timothy Liljegren have this type of miscommunication. They're not on the same wavelength, and they leave Moore all alone, and he's able to score that goal that makes it 3-1. So that is a very major problem point for San Jose, and not really something that actually has an easy fix over these last 9 games. You kind of just have to deal with it as the rest of this season runs on. But the bright spot for the Sharks defensively, because there really wasn't much doing in that top 4, was actually their bottom pairing of Marc-Edouard Vlasic and Luca Cagnoni. So Vlasic makes his return to the lineup. He has not played for a couple of weeks. It was also his birthday here today, which is a fun coincidence. And what it seems to be the case with Vlasic is that these long breaks from the lineup seem to be actually doing him a lot of good. If you recall, Vlasic did not play the first few months of this season, which gave him many days off from actually playing any sort of NHL hockey. And when he returned to the lineup in early January, he actually was rather effective for the Sharks for those first few games before reverting back to the usual Vlasic that we are used to, which is not very good play. And now, having missed these last couple of weeks, he was again one of the Sharks' better defensemen. It's not saying much, but he actually looked pretty decent here in semi-limited ice time. In fact, he was the only positive player on the entire team. In an 8-1 loss, he was a +1, which is somewhat of an accomplishment. On the other side, Luca Cagnoni, what we saw here tonight, at first, the first half, I don't think he did too much bad, but he wasn't really super apparent. But it was really in the last half of this game when the Sharks just didn't seem to be getting much going. Cagnoni started to showcase a lot more confidence with the puck, and he was trying to be more aggressive. This includes standing up in the neutral zone or just simply skating along the blue line. He deked out multiple different Los Angeles Kings players, creating strong shooting lanes toward the net and getting some very good chances for himself. This was probably the most promising set of minutes that Luca Cagnoni has played since being called up to the NHL. And I do have to wonder if this approach that the Sharks maybe seem to be taking with some of their young players when they originally get called up is kind of holding them back a little bit. Because when it came to those first couple of games for Luca Cagnoni, he kept it simple and really wasn't doing much to try and make a huge impact on the game. The same goes with Shakir Mukhamadullin when he was first called up. The same goes for Colin Graff during his first call-up. These young guys feeling as though maybe they're not super comfortable to try and make a play happen at the NHL level. Now, this might just be because of, the jitters of playing there in your first few games. Although for Graff and Mukhamadullin, it technically wasn't their first games in their careers. They had played a few last season, but still it was quite early on. But it could also be something that maybe the coaching staff is telling them to do, saying, hey, you need to keep this simple if you want to be able to keep that lineup spot, which is maybe kind of put some chains on them and not allowing them to actually make much of an impact. Now, eventually, as time has gone on, we've seen Graff get more confident and he looks a lot more settled. We've seen Mukhamadullin get a lot more confident, perhaps even too confident, and he's been a lot more settled. Cagnoni, hopefully he is transitioning to that. It is possible, though, that we are only seeing this type of play from him because the Sharks were pretty much out of the game, and so he maybe felt a little bit more free to actually make these moves. I am hopeful, however, that he'll actually be willing to do so, even in tight games, even when it's 0-0 or 1-1 or early in the third period holding a 1-goal lead. This is the type of difference maker that Luca Cagnoni, we are hoping that he can be. Because if he's just keeping it simple and getting pucks out and icing them and attempting to be that defensive guy, what is the difference between Luca Cagnoni and Jan Rutta at that point? You want to see the skating, you want to see the shooting, you want to see the offensive capabilities. We saw that briefly here tonight through the third period, and I'm hopeful it can carry forward. But that will do it for this review. I guess it didn't actually end up being that much shorter than usual, but I guess by a couple of minutes. The Sharks will be back in action on Tuesday, where they'll be taking on the Anaheim Ducks, another road trip game here, but still remaining in California. And while the Ducks are definitely an easier opponent, and there will be more space to work with on the ice compared to this Los Angeles Kings game, the Ducks have actually looked rather good in the second half of this season. They're playing with a lot of confidence at this moment. Their young guys seem to have really unlocked their potential here and are looking very, very strong. And so this is not going to be an easy matchup for San Jose, despite what maybe the standings could potentially indicate. The Sharks will have to bring their A game if they actually want to rebound from this really tough weekend. Class dismissed.